Okay, we're on the last step for this beach cover-up. I've got my elastic inside. You have to make sure that if you have a top loader that your elastic is threaded properly in your machine. You don't have to worry so much with a bottom loader because there's it works. You don't have that you don't have that problem with bottom loader, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now you're going to decide how many lines of stitching you want to do. On both of these, my first line of stitching was right on top of my zigzag that I just put in. So I'm going to do the same thing again. When you're using the elastic thread, the elastic only goes in your bobbin, it doesn't go into your top. You go to your regular straight stitch and you use a gather stitch. Make it your gathering stitch the widest gather stitch that you have on your machine. And that's how you pretty much basically do this elastic thread. So how I do it is I like to tie my ends together when I instead of backspacing, because I can control my gather, because I'm able to pull my thread if I want more of a gather. If I backstitch, I'm pretty much locking those threads in place, and I don't like that. Number one, I don't think they stay, and by going ahead and tying my threads, my beginning and my ending pieces together, I'm able to control the tension or the amount of gather. So I'm going to make my ending stitch, it doesn't matter, you can put it on any of your back edges, wherever you want to begin and end. I'm going to go ahead and just use my back stitch. I want my elastic thread to be on the inside, so all you see is regular thread on the outside. So I am going to sew on the top of the fabric. So like I said, I'm going to turn this inside out because it's easier to sew that way, and I'm just going to go ahead and sew my first line of stitching right on top of my previous turn. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do the neck area before I do the waist. So this is stitching line number 1. And because we're sewing on 2 layers of fabric, you're not going to get very much of a gather. So if you're looking at that and wondering where the gather's at, you're not going to see it till I put the other 2 rows in. Okay, so now I'm coming up to where I started this row. So I'm going to just come right up onto it and I'm going to stop. Okay, because I don't want to overlap those rows. So I'm going to pull out and I'm going to give myself enough thread so I can make sure that I have enough to tie in knots once I'm finished with all my rows. So I'm going to cut my top thread off and I'm going to give myself a pull on this elastic thread so I can give myself a good, I don't know, maybe 5 inches to work with. Okay, so now I'm ready to start row 2. And row 2, can you see where I just did that? I just sewed directly on top of my fold, so it was halfway between my folds. So now I'm going to go ahead and put in row number 2. Okay, So I'm going to go right next to that other row. I want all three of my rows to be pretty close together. This one I've got, I don't know if you can see in the white thread on the white fabric, but it's probably maybe 1/8 of an inch apart. Let me get my ruler out. I'm doing 1, 2, yes. My stitches are 1/8 of an inch apart. So next row will be 1/8 of an inch, so let's just go ahead and start row number 2. I'm not going to pull any of my threads until I'm completely done with everything. So how am I going to just measure that 1/8 of an inch? I can move my needle position, which is an easy way of doing it, which is what I'll do. So I'm just going to move my needle over. And make sure you go back to a gathering stitch. So let me see where that will line up. Let me see where that stitching is. Okay, that looks good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and do that again. Let me see what I did. Okay, that was too far away from my previous line of stitching, so I'm going to try that again. So let me take that off. Take this off and pull out that thread. It was just too far away from the previous line. I didn't want it that far. So we'll try this again. Okay, so let's try it again. Okay, so I moved my needle position over more to the right side, and I think I got it right now. Yeah, okay, so let's put in another row. Okay, we're towards the back again, so let's move our stitching out of the way, our tails out of the way. Okay, come right back up on that line of stitching, pull your threads, make your cuts, and you see how that we're getting more and more of a gather every row we do. So I'm going to put in one more row, and then we're going to be able to pull our strings. We want to pull our strings simultaneously so that we get the same gather all the way around. So let me put in my last row of stitching. I'm going to change my needle position all the way over to the left, and I should have an even spacing between all of these 3 rows. Okay, so here's our final row for the top of the see if I got the right spacing here. Yep, okay. So we're ready to do the last and final row. I don't want to catch that thread, so let's move it out of the way. When you're doing this elastic, you always want to pull your fabric flat. You don't want to sew it when it's in the gathered position, because that's going to mess up your smocking look. Okay, get all your tails out of the way. Home stretch. Okay, we don't want to go over the previous stitching, so get everything out of the way. And come up right onto that beginning stitching. Okay. So let's cut that. Cut this. And turn our blouse inside out. Right side out, I should say. And decide if we want to increase our... Okay, one thing about this elastic, when you put it in the washer and dryer, it's going to shrink up a bit. So you don't want to pull it too much. If you plan on washing this, and being that this is white, you may be washing it every once in a while. So you should think about that as far as the how your elastic is tightened, how you tighten up your elastic. So if I was going to tighten up the elastic, I would take those 3 strings on the same side together, and I would pull my gathers evenly so that they all go together evenly. So there's my 3 on the left. So I'm going to grab them, and I'm going to pull at the same time. Do you see how that's happening there? And I'm just pulling this a little bit tighter, and I'm going all the way around. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's just too wide of a neck for the doll. I know that, but you're going to have to put it on your doll and try it on. So this time I'm going to take the 3 from the other side, the 3 elastic threads, and I'm going to pull them evenly at the same time. So let's see, here's 1, here's 2, here's number 2, and number 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to grab them all together, and I'm going to pull. Okay, and before I make any more gathers, I'm going to try it on the doll. So I'll take Kyla here. Now this is one of those blouses where you have to come up the bottom because there's no Velcro or anything in the back. So I'm also trying this on the doll now because I want to see where I want the waistband to be. So let's get it on her. Okay, so that's pretty good. I kind of like the way that elastic is. By the time I tie these off together, I'm going to probably need a little bit more gathering. Do you see how that is? It's just a little bit too loose on the back. So I'm going to have to put some more gathers in here. So, but as far as the front goes and the sleeves, I can probably go higher on the neckline. It's not going to have much of that off the shoulder look if I gather much more, because I think I did put the sleeves a little bit too long underneath. But also by putting the waistband in is also going to give me a little bit of a pull from, I don't know if the camera can see this, but it's going to give me a little bit of the pull underneath. So decide where you want the waistband, so then just measure up from the bottom. If you want that little overlap look like this, you're going to want to go with a lower waistband so that you can, put this up higher. You can go with two lines of stitching, or you can go with 3 lines of stitching. It's up to you. My only suggestion is to put your stitching close, evenly spaced, so it looks good. Okay, so in this case I'm going to make it a blouse, so I'm going to put my waistband about right here. So I'm going to measure up probably 2.5 inches. On this one I went up 2 inches for my first line of stitching, And on this one I went up 2.5 for my first line of stitching and worked my way down. So they look up to be about the same. So you probably want from the bottom line of stitching about 2 inches each. So this one's like 1.75 inches, but that seems to be the good place to put the stitching. But like I say, it's up to you. It depends on what kind of look you're looking for. So if I was going to do my stitching, of course I'm going to be doing it on the right side. So I'm going to do it the same way I did the neck. I'm going to come in here. In this time I'm going to take off my attachment here so I can fit my fabric inside the machine. So I'm going to start with the back, and I'm going to put my elastic on the inside. So I want my first line of stitching to be 2 inches from the bottom, so I'm going to have to find a mark on my plate to find out where I want that first line of stitching to be. So in my case, 2 inches from the center of my stitch is going to be right to the end of my plate. So I'm going to make that my first line of stitching, and then from there I'll be able to use my actual stitching line as my guide. But the first one you're going to have to figure out. So let me put my machine back to center position and make sure you're still in a full gathering stitch, and put in your first row of stitching using your plate as your guide. Or if you don't have a plate, get a piece of masking tape, or they have those metal magnet ones that you can put on your machine, and use that as a guide. Whatever you can use is fine. So I'm really not looking at my stitching, I'm looking over here to make sure I'm keeping it lined up. Okay, so now I'm up to my line of stitching. I don't want to go over it, so I'm just going to come right up on it and then stop. Okay, so there's line 1. So now I'm going to do line 2, but I'm not going to bore you guys with all the sewing. But anyway, that is your beach cover-up, and you can just go from there as to how many more lines of stitching you want to put in your waistband. If you don't like try it on with one line of stitching. If you decide you want it to go lower, then you can just easily pull this out, because it is just a gathering stitch, and that's pretty much basically your beach cover-up, and that's how simple it is to use a t-shirt sleeve for a beach cover-up. Okay, so thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later. Okay, so what I did is I put 3 lines of stitching in the waist, 1, 2, 3. I haven't finished this. I haven't finished sewing any of the ends in, so I'm going to tie off my elastic in a square knot, and then I'm going to sew my ends in, and then just knot them and cut them. And basically, that sleeve pattern we made is about right to the crook of the arm. So pretty much almost exactly the same size you'd put on a t-shirt sleeve. And then you can move these gathers around a little bit until you can get the ruffles right in the right location where you want them. You don't have to be happy with where they're at. If you don't like them, you can move them around. Same with the waist, you can move the waist around. We probably could have made this a little more narrow, because it's pretty thick, pretty wide I should say. I think the other t-shirts were either a medium or a large, so it does matter as far as the size of the t-shirt as to the width of the, but you can always cut them down. She probably could have been a little bit smaller, but all in all, not too bad. So there's your beach cover-ups. Okay, bye.